Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Anthony Tezak. As we enter the new year, the governor wants to continue to spend without telling us how he's going to pay for it. Joining me today to talk about a possible solution is State Representative Jim Christiana. Representative, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Representative, you are getting ready to introduce a bill that would impose a severance tax on the drillers here in Pennsylvania. Coming from you, that kind of seems like an unlikely source for this type of a tax. What made you decide to move forward with it?
Well, the severance tax has been at the center of the budget debate throughout the first year, and it was at the center of the campaign last year. While it kind of gotten tabled the last couple months, the governor has made it very clear that a severance tax is something that is going to be part of his agenda this year. And every time the governor talks about a severance tax, all he really does is he puts the word severance and tax together in a sentence and then throws out a wild revenue estimate. You know, we've all heard the billion-dollar myth that a severance tax would bring in $1 billion. The problem is every time the governor has actually had to propose a plan, it doesn't come to anywhere near that revenue estimate. And my biggest frustration with the governor is that his tax proposals are punitive. They are they would lead Pennsylvania, or I'm sorry, they would lead the nation in the severance tax, putting it on top of already high tax burden. Anthony, as you know, we have the second highest corporate net income tax. And so if we're going to talk about a severance tax, what I'm trying to do is to frame that conversation around what an actual proposal would look like. What is a reasonable severance tax? And highlighting the fact that we already assess the industry through the impact fee. And so if we're going to go to a severance tax, then we need to shift away from the impact fee. The impact fee has brought in, roughly $200 million a year on top of the taxes that the industry is already paying. You know, Anthony, this industry pays the same taxes as every other industry. On top of that, they pay an impact fee. But the Republicans have lost the public relations battle. You know, we're always fighting the battle that we're the only state in the nation that doesn't have a severance tax. And then we follow it up with, yes, but we're the only state that has an impact fee. We've lost that battle, in my opinion. And so if we're going to go to a traditional severance tax, a traditional assessment of the natural gas industry, then we've got to do it in a responsible manner. And what I put out, I believe, is a framework that will not punish the industry, but will collect an assessment in a different means. So it'll shift away from the impact fee to a severance tax.
You mentioned the impact fee, and it's important to note the governor's plan did not eliminate the impact fee, which in regards to the way the original legislation was written, is necessary, correct?
Well, the governor says, all right, you're going to have to continue to pay the second highest corporate net income tax in the nation. We're going to put an impact fee in place that has an effective rate anywhere from 4 to 8%. On top of that, we're going to put a severance tax. On top of that, we're going to put a minimum floor price. He just ignores the market reality. If the price for natural gas is $1 today, the governor says, well, we're going to tax you on $2.50. I mean, completely ignoring market realities. And when you add up all those taxes together, there's really no reason for these companies to stay in Pennsylvania. So what I'm trying to do is say, okay, let's acknowledge that that they pay an impact fee. Let's acknowledge they pay all the other taxes. And then if we're going to go to a severance tax, let's make it reasonable. Let's make the rate tied to the market so that if we're in tough economic times like we are right now, that we're not hitting them with the highest tax rate in the nation. And if we do grow and prosper, then we can get to the governor's 5% severance tax. But we're not going to ignore market realities, and we're not going to ignore the taxes that they're already paying.
The impact fee was put into place to help offset any problems for the local communities where this drilling is taking place. With the elimination of the impact fee, is there still money being put aside for those local communities in the severance tax?
That's a great question, because that's one of the concerns I'm hearing recently. Well, you get rid of the impact fee, but we get money for the impact fee. Well, let me be very clear. You're still going to, those areas that I represent, in Beaver and Washington counties, and Bradford County, and all across the Commonwealth that are receiving impact fee dollars, they're just going to shift to receiving severance tax dollars. They're not going to receive less. In fact, I think they actually have the opportunity to get more long term, because the severance tax, while it is a tax, I'm not convinced that it's the most fair tax to the industry, and I don't think it gives a whole lot of predictability to our locals. So they will still receive revenue. It just would be from a severance tax, not an impact fee.
When the governor first started talking about the budget, every time you heard severance tax, you heard education next to it. And after looking at the numbers, like you said, a hard economic time, we realized that it's just not plausible to raise funding for education through a severance tax. However, I believe your plan does put some money aside to help the education portion. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, because the governor all of a sudden now is criticizing this plan because it doesn't put money directly to education. Well, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in his statements, because first we got to look at his plan. What did his plan do? It took money from the natural gas industry and it gave it to the wind and solar companies that he and his cabinet would hand select. So for the governor to go through the entire campaign and say, tax the natural gas industry for education, 3 days after getting the keys to the office, he comes out with a severance tax proposal that doesn't take the money from the severance tax and give it to education. He gave it to wind and solar companies. So first of all, the governor needs to admit that his first plan didn't invest in education. In fact, it was completely disingenuous to say that his plan did, because it didn't at all. Now my plan actually protects those locals that we were just talking about, protects the Marcellus Legacy Fund and the Environmental Stewardship Fund. And then it gives 2/3 of the remaining dollars to the general fund. And I actually believe that that's the best way for us to respect the legislative branch and the budget process. And every year when we go through the appropriations hearings and we build a budget, we'll then make the decision to invest all the revenue. You know, the governor, I think, didn't quite understand last year during the campaign. He didn't really understand how the budget process works. We don't get to just earmark revenue for certain expenses. It all comes together. We build a state budget, and then we make the right investments. And so I think my plan is actually much more reflective of how Harrisburg and the budget process works. The governor's just, talking to the polls and the pundits that he's giving money from the natural gas industry to education. First of all, his plan didn't do that, and that's not how the budget process works.
It's been interesting watching the governor throughout his first year, and it seems like he really doesn't know what he wants. So here you are giving him a severance tax like he asked for, and we haven't heard much from Governor Wolf or his spokesperson, Jeff Sheridan, in regards to support for this plan. What's your thoughts on all that?
Well, the governor has said he wanted a severance tax. For a year and a half, we've heard he wanted a severance tax, but it's a very complicated issue. I mean, what's the tax rate? How are we going to collect it? Where are we going to distribute the funds? And are we going to protect our locals? My plan is a minimum 3% tax. When the price of natural gas in Pennsylvania gets to $2 an MCF, it'll go to 4%. When it gets to back to $3 an MCF, it'll go to 5%. So the governor will get his 5%, but we're not going to kick the industry in the teeth when they're, going through one of the worst times in generation. People in my district are getting laid off in the natural gas industry. Those companies are moving out of Pennsylvania. And for us to slap another tax, the highest in the nation, I think is bad public policy. But what I will support is taking an impact fee that is a very non-traditional way to tax the industry. And I'm willing to shift to a severance tax if done in an appropriate manner and if we protect our locals and their funding.
Finally, we only have a few moments left, but we know you put out the co-sponsorship memo recently. What's the next step? Where do we go from here, and how do you get this on the governor's desk?
Well, the first thing is I think the severance tax debate has been a very narrow debate. It's been about just taxing the industry and where to spend the money. I think what we're now going through is actually talking amongst the Republicans. Some that want, a 5%, some that don't want any tax. It's a pretty broad spectrum. And we're getting them together and we're working on the most responsible solution. And I believe that there'll be a tremendous amount of support in the Republicans. The Democrats and the governor will be left to whether or not they want to get this done and accomplished. But the Republicans in the House are committed to listening to the public, delivering a good product, and protecting the industry and their employees. I think we need more examples of that in Harrisburg, not less.
All right, Representative Christiana, good luck, and hope to have you back and hear that the process is moving forward.
Thanks, Anthony.
That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have questions about what you've just heard or any other state government-related matter, Representative Christiana's contact information will be on the screen in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join us again next time for another edition of Legislative Report.